Hello, happy holidays, and welcome to Mapping the College Audition, a podcast where we explore the landscape of the college theater world and try to demystify this daunting audition process. I'm your host, Charlie Murphy, director of MTCA, that's Musical Theater College Auditions, and today we have got an explicitly wonderful show lined up for you. Marcia Debonis, who is an amazing casting director and actor, you're going to hear all of her wonderful credits in a second, they really will blow you away. I met Marcia doing theater together 15 years ago, oh my, and that has morphed into what is now a Broadway show league style rivalship. You were worried, I know, that we were losing our string of having athletes on the pod. Well, fear not, here's another great athlete on the pod from the show league. I will say to our younger listeners, those maybe still auditioning for college, that this episode may actually be a bit further along for you. So if you're just right in the midst of college audition craziness and you want to archive this and come back to it, it'll be here waiting for you as a little holiday gift for next year. I think this is like a really fascinating look into the professional world for our students. So maybe our students are in college or maybe right out of college, certainly those who are farther along in their career. But it is definitely more later career focused when we talk about stuff like how to get cast in a pilot. Not that that's not interesting to us as 16, 17-year-olds for those who are in that listenership or the parents of such, but just maybe a little bit far away from actually happening for you. Also, for our parents of young children, a warning here that a little bit of swearing pops into this episode. I'm actually, for I think the second time on this podcast, we had to add an explicit tag. I don't know if you saw that on your podcast platform, but if you would prefer not to hear that, this might be one to skip, though I truly, this is not, nothing gets too graphic or gratuitous or anything. You know, if you have a teenage child, I don't think it'll bother you, depending what your sensibilities are. I guess I should say for my sensibilities, wouldn't bother me for what we do in terms of what we're talking about. But a little bit of colorful, jovial, shop talk kind of language where a couple F-bombs and S-bombs and bombs of different kinds are dropped. In MTCA news, we just finished a really incredibly successful MTCA private audition weekend. It was really fun to have. We had 4 great schools come to audition our kids in one weekend. And, you know, as all things, we really try to place things strategically throughout the year. And this is something we've been talking about doing for 4 years almost now, of just what if there was this really strategic weekend placed, which is why we had it in late December, where the students were ready to audition for some great schools, but still not maybe overload the weekend so much that, you know, it's going to overwhelm their upcoming prime season in January and February. So far, it seems like it's been a real success. We've been hearing raves from the faculty about the talent and from the students about how much they enjoyed their experience in the rooms, which is all music to our ears. We're hoping it becomes a launching pad to have those students all the more prepared for their upcoming slate of auditions in the new year. I was thinking about many of our students who maybe got to participate in Pittsburgh Unifieds, where they got to meet a lot of emerging programs, and now this weekend, meeting some established, excellent programs before going on to their maybe private audition day with us with Baldwin Wallace, and then the 3 big unified cities, as well as their on-campus auditions. Those kids are about as prepared for 2023 as you possibly can be, and all the joys that it's going to bring us. Speaking of ready, let's get to the great Marcia Debonis to talk some career advice from behind the table. Well, we are so honored to have Marcia Debonis on the pod today. Marcia is a true multi-hyphenate in being not like half actor and half casting director, but having like 2 complete careers that span these 30 years. She has a BA in theater arts from UCLA, and as an actor, she's appeared in films like 13 Going on 30, Sully, Bride Wars, many more, TV shows like Orange is the New Black, Homeland, Lipstick Jungle, Curb Your Enthusiasms. In casting, she spent 8 years casting for 20th Century Fox Studios for their pilot season, where she cast the pilot of Arrested Development. We've heard of it. Then she spent 4 years casting pilots for NBC. She also cast many films like Morning Glory, What Lies Beneath, and Bride Wars, where she appears to have combined her 2 hats and cast herself. Very smart to do that. No, absolutely not. She has also taught at Juilliard, Yale. She's worked extensively in theater, where she's perhaps best known for spending a summer around 2007 teaching and performing in a production of A Wilderness at Chautauqua Theater Company, where she met your favorite podcast host.
That would be Charlie.
That's me. She also was part of, she started a company called The Tape Room with Amy Christopher, which is a company that helps actors with self-tapes, and also proudly boasts years of casting for the Atlantic Theater Company, for whom she plays in the Broadway show League Softball, and trounced a very despondent downtowner team with a roped single that I can still feel whizzing past my head in my dreams.
You make me laugh.
Marcia, welcome on the pod. How are you doing today?
I am good. I'm so happy to be here.
We are so happy to have you. And I'm going to start you off with the same question I ask everyone,
Mhm.
which is to think back, so our listeners span that 16 to 17-year-old age and then some really up into the 20s and even early 30s. But think back to that 16, 17-year-old self. I'd love to talk about what led you to UCLA in terms of like, what were you thinking about in terms of if you had like a college goals or college mission statement of what you were looking for? Were you thinking about different hyphens back then? What did you want from a college education?
I grew up in California, which has a spectacular school, UC system. So my parents were very much like, you're going to one of the UC schools. Like I didn't have a choice.
For cost, that was the goal.
That was it. It's like you go to one of the UC things. I grew up in the good part of California, northern. And I didn't want to go to Berkeley. I wanted to get further away. And UCLA, I did know I wanted to be an actor. I think I wanted to be a nurse when I was like 5 or 6. And then I realized I don't like blood. Then I wanted to be a hairstylist. And then I just decided I wanted to be an actor. So when I was 16 or 17, I knew I wanted to be an actor. And I figured I would probably, apply for UCLA, where I could not get into now, nor could I afford it because it's gone up so much.
And were you thinking then, I mean, I know there weren't as many BFAs back then or conservatory style programs. Was that something on your radar?
No.
I wanted to get a BA or theater arts degree, or just I want to get a theater degree?
No, I really regret that I did not. Two things. I regret that I did not get a BFA. And in fact, I'm so dumb that I thought I had one for like 20 years until one of my UCLA classmates was like, Marcia, we didn't get a BFA.
You don't have a BFA. She's like, I've got a BFA from UCLA. And they're like, no, you
okay.
don't.
UCLA, I had a ball there. I met friends who I've been friends with since there. In particular, one, he was a MFA director, Michael Edwards, who is now the artistic director at the Oslo down in Florida. But so I learned a lot and stuff. But I really wish I had understood. I started school. I'm old. I started school in 1978, and I didn't really get the whole.
She was 2 years old at the time, just to be clear, everyone. Just to do the math.
I was an early bloomer, but I didn't kind of get, like, obviously, I didn't know that there's a difference between BA, which feels to me at UCLA, I got a very over umbrella thing. I had to take a lighting class and all those kind of things. However, I never had to take a Shakespeare class. So I'm completely without any of that and feel it. And it just was way too much of a just sort of general thing. So I wish I had realized there was a difference between BFAs and BAs. Because BFAs, you get more training, correct?
Right. You get more structured, sort of specific training. But do you feel like the BA contributed to, I mean, again, you've had both of these hats. We'll talk about both of them. Do you feel like that overarching education helped you to be like, I do understand more sides of the table, or I understand a little bit more of how production works? Or some of the larger
I do not.
Sides
Look, could I tell the difference between a Lico and a Fresnel light? Sure. Who gives a shit? So I really, really regret that I did not get a more focused, specialized undergrad. And I really wish I had gone to grad school.
Just because you feel as an actor that lack of like, whatever that mystery of the specific Shakespeare training or specific, high level.
I just,
training.
To me, it's always been daunting. Anything other than kitchen sink drama, because I have no training. I never took, like, we had one voice class at UCLA. I just happen to have a really loud voice, so I'm okay.
We've turned our volume knobs all the way down on the podcast.
Exactly. It's like, it was much different. This was 40 years ago. I've been in New York for 40 years, and just the whole training thing was much different. It was not as specialized. People, I don't think kids my age, or 16, 18, knew about what was going on as much.
Of course. We didn't have the internet. Exactly. You're looking at a brochure or something. Yeah.
But
How it seemed like it didn't hold you back. So I guess how did those years post UCLA work as you're hitting the ground running in NYC and figuring out what your career was going to
Well,
be?
one of the big things was I met the fabulous Seth Barish, who is the artistic director of the Barrow Group Theater Company, which has become primarily a school, and it's a fabulous school. And so I had met, we were friends from UCLA, and he actually moved here at the same time. And I, ignorance is bliss. Like, thank God I did not know how hard it is.
We hear that all the
Honestly.
time. Yeah, I'm just diving in because you didn't know how
You're
cold
so
the water was going to be.
clueless. And I do remember going, I'm going to give myself 5 years, and thinking to myself at 21, come on. Of course, I'm going to be working within. I mean, come on.
Within 5 years.
5
My
years
God, I'll be so old. I'll be 26.
Interminable, and of course, I was not working within 5 years. But, and this is what I tell all my students, I started a theater company with Seth Barish, pulled together people he'd met in a variety of places. UCLA, he studied. Uta Hagen was still alive when he moved here, so he studied with Uta. And so he pulled people from Uta's class. There was another. So I started a theater company, the Barrow Group, in 1986. And for seriously the first, and we were together loosely for the year before. So that was really the only place I worked. I didn't have an agent when I first got here. And so, that was sort of my home. I don't think I would still be in New York if I hadn't had the Barrow Group. I'm not sure I would still be an actor if I hadn't had the Barrow Group.
And what about sort of the decision to get into casting and what that journey was like? So I guess when did that happen? Why did it happen? And then a little bit, how did you make that? Because I think a lot of people be like, I'd be interested in doing casting, but how does that happen?
I have my best friend from UCLA used to call me a walking, talking playbill or a walking, talking TV guide, because I just have that kind of head, and you either have it or you don't. I don't think it's something you can learn. So I just
we're going to be testing that in our game today, Marcia. Don't you worry. We'll be testing your walking, talking TV guide.
So I just would always, people would always say, Marcia, what have they done before? So I had sort of thought, if I ever give up acting, without any sense that I was going to give up acting, I would kind of like to get into casting. I think that would be fun. So I went on an audition for the fabulous casting director, Linda Lowy, who is out in LA. And she's spectacular. And literally right before I got there, they'd got a phone call that the part I was auditioning for, a non-sexual helper, because that's all I'm allowed to play.
That wasn't the name of it, non-sexual helper,
probably.
Was it? Oh my gosh, that's very descriptive.
But anyway, the part had been cut. So I just started to talk to Linda about, I'm, interested in casting. And she said, well, Bonnie Finnegan, who's a fabulous casting director who happened to be in the office next door to her back in the old video portfolios days. I don't know if that was before your time. Linda said, Bonnie's looking for an assistant. You should go next door. And I was like, oh, no, I'm not. I'm going away to do a play regionally. And this is just like, I think no, you should go next door. You should go next door. So I was sort of shamed into sticking my head into Bonnie Finnegan's room, where I was met with the what is an actor that I don't know and don't have an appointment for doing in my doorway look. But she was desperate. She had hired someone, but they couldn't start for a couple of weeks. So she said, look, you want to, are you interested? I was waitressing. I was the meanest waitress in Manhattan. And she said, you can leave at 4 or whatever to get to, the days that you have to. And so I was like, sure, I'll do it. And I loved it. And I loved Bonnie. And I learned stuff from Bonnie that I use to this day. You want to hear what it is?
Yes, please.
Never write anyone off. Her point was you can spend 5 minutes arguing with the agent about why their client isn't right, or you can see them. And that is to me, such a big, big lesson. She and the never writing anybody off thing. Her point was specifically when people have children, that they're particularly with men, no offense, but their heart's open, and all of a sudden, they are able to access something that they never could before. And I have found that to be true. And I won't say her name, but there was a wonderful Yale trained actress, I'll tell you later, who was just fabulous, but icy. like just you couldn't cast her literally as anybody who needed warmth. She had a baby. Now, she's not a ball of warmth, but it's amazing the change.
Your heart grows 3 sizes. I mean,
right?
I wrote it in my little, after my daughter was born, I wrote the thing of like, I really feel like it's like the Grinch stole Christmas happens to you.
And all of a sudden you're not the primary focus.
You become thin skinned in a way too, in a way that's scary as a man, especially where you're like, I'm and then you're like, oh my God, I'm crying at anything. I'm just like this, which as an actor
is fantastic. So
this is a whole other podcast about my fatherhood, and we'll talk about it.
But so anyway, so I started with Bonnie, and then she asked, because I'm a workhorse. I have a little OCD, so I found a career that works with my mental illness. Because casting is very much about organization. People think, oh, it's just about having a good eye. That's not true. You have to be incredibly organized. It's a lot of anticipatory things. If this happens, then what are we going to do? Da, 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 da.
Yep. And someone from 10 years ago who I did see them. I wonder where they are now. And how can they,
exactly. So,
well, maybe it'd be helpful just for our listeners, because we're going to get deep into casting in the second half a little more, but just to kind of define. So, I mean, some of our listeners, of course, will know what a casting director is, but just from an overarching perspective, like what does a casting director do? And maybe how it's a little different in TV and film versus theater, but just like, what is your general job as a casting director?
So our general job is we are hired by the producers of the theater or the TV or the film. And oftentimes with TV and film, there are actors already attached. Like there's a big, like when I did Morning Glory with Ellen Lewis, Rachel McAdams was already attached, which was fabulous. She's spectacular. And so was Harrison Ford and Diane Keaton. But then what our job is to put out what's called a breakdown, which my guess is most of your kids know what that is, but that's something that is released to the agents, and it just breaks down all the characters. We would usually write our own breakdowns and get it to break down, because sometimes it would put weird things on it. And then the agents will look through their clients and then submit who they think is appropriate. And then we will go through the submissions and choose who we would like to see. It's different nowadays because we used to be able to have people come in, and now it's primarily self-tape, although I hear theater is getting back to in-person.
For sure. And what, maybe talk about some of those differences of self-tape and get into some of the specifics. But then, so for TV and film, in general, there are some roles perhaps that you would actually be able to cast, right? Versus some roles that you're going to be sending up to other people to make the decisions. They're going, here's the final five, or here's the
casting director has no power, and that's something, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that I think actors give casting directors way too much prominence, like, we don't, all we can do is get you in front of whoever our director is. Now there are obviously really fancy casting directors who probably have a lot of pull, but in general our job is to give some choices to our director and producers. We have and in television, it's everywhere. It's become a nightmare of the approval, because you literally now have to send it to everyone.
And you're saying even with roles like, policeman number 2 or whatever, you're like,
I think still with like episodics and stuff, that they still, it doesn't have to go way up to the top of NBC on Law and Order, but it does go to Trey Lawson at, you know what I mean? So there's still, and then, and for the series regulars, which was when I covered pilot season, I only covered series regulars. So I never had to worry about casting the co-stars.
The policeman number 3 or whatever.
But it's a whole, you have to pass this, then that, then da, 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 da. And it's different now, because it used to be, as far as TV goes, you would test, and it was a 2-pronged thing. First, you would go in front of the studio. There was usually 3 to 5 choices. And then the studio would usually narrow it down to 2. And they had to be fine with either of those 2, because it then becomes the network's decision of which of those 2.
And it's just whoever has the most Instagram followers. That's it. You just make that decision.
I mean, honestly, though, that I had a friend who wrote a script this was a few years ago, but and it was about I don't want to say what it was about because you could look it up and find out who it was, but it was about something that happened in the 70s, real people.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, because it was network television, it became about with the women being all drop dead gorgeous. But one of them was even prettier than drop dead gorgeous. So this model came in, read for the one that's even prettier, and she said she was fine. She wasn't bad. She was fine. And she left, and the entire room was like, oh my God, we found it. Oh, this is so great. We've solved our problem. And my friend was like, finally was like, but she's not really an actress. And they're like, I know, but you can't stop looking at her. And she's dating Kevin Love, and he has 2 million followers. He's a basketball player. And
our listeners know who Kevin Love is. Believe me, we're very deep in the basketball analogies.
I love sports. So yeah, and she got cast, and guess what? The pilot did not get picked up. And one of the reasons was there was a big black hole in the lead. So, unfortunately, I think if you're over 50 or so, the network and stuff will let you alone. But if you're under it, they want you to do social media.
If you're a non-sexual helper, they'll leave you alone.
Yeah,
but if
exactly. Non-sexual helpers. Hence the non-sexual.
I want to dive deeper into some of these casting stuff first, but in the second half. But I want to first just talk a little bit about, one of the things that I think is most remarkable about you is your insistence and persistence in being both a casting director and an actor, right? I think when we met at Chautauqua all those years ago, you were teaching casting classes, but you were also acting in the shows. And the way you would lead was also, I'm an actor, right? I think it's something that you clearly insisted on keeping that hyphen strong for yourself. And I think, many of our young students they want to be multi-hyphenates now. They've heard that term. They go, I like the idea of doing many things and how that's going to be part of my career. I guess, was that advice that was given to you? Was it something you always knew? What made you lead with that strong?
One thing that happened was when I very first moved to New York and had my first, big audition, I was told, I did have an agent by that time. And this was when I was probably 23, 24, 25. I had an agent who I knew from UCLA. And the feedback was, she's fabulous. She's going to start working like crazy when she's 30. Then I turned 30. And I was told, she's fabulous. She's going to really start working when I'm a character actress when she's 40. And I was like, I can't. And so I fell into the casting, but the real reason I committed to it, because I worked for Bonnie for 2 weeks, and then I went away and did a regional theater show. And when I came back, the restaurant I'd worked at for 8 years had closed. And I was just like, I'm not working my way up. The thought of having, I don't know if you ever waited on tables, but.
Oh, yes, for a brief time, but yes, it was.
Okay. So I just was like, I worked at a place that was 2 blocks away. They let me come and go. And I got back, they'd closed. And I just thought, I just can't. I cannot work my way up. So I called Bonnie. She did not need anyone. And I had, right before I had gone up to do the thing, I had actually finally gotten an audition for Law and Order. And I went in and I said to Suzanne Ryan, who is a dear friend of mine now, I said, look, I just helped Bonnie Finnegan out. If you ever need any help, let me know. 7:30 the next morning. Bring, can you come in? So I'd worked there. So then I called Lynn Cressels and was like, I'm back. And are you looking for someone? And then I started, and then I got sucked in. And that was not intentional. And that's the one thing that I, not warn, but I feel like actors are good at a lot of things. I don't know any actor who has gotten a temp job who has not been asked to stay. Like, I think our ability to engage and be friendly and whatever is something that a lot of people don't have. And I know I couldn't make a living as an actor at that time. I am I'm ethnic, but not diverse. I'm overweight. It's just like I couldn't make a living. So the truth of it is, when I got into casting, it was a relief in the sense that, like, oh, good. I don't have to waitress anymore, whatever, but I couldn't do any theater forever. So I didn't do a play. I did my last play regionally at that time in 1993. And then I didn't do another play till 2004. But I got to act more than anybody I know. I got to act, because I covered primarily pilot season. I got to act from 11 in the morning until 6 at night, playing
just behind the camera,
but getting to read with kick-ass actors, like kick-ass actors. Everybody has to start somewhere. And I got to play, not just female parts that I would never be considered for, but I got to read male parts. And so, in fact, I feel as a casting person, I got to act much more than any of my friends. And that is including people who were series regulars.
But I guess you've mentioned that idea of being sucked in, which I guess I'm interested in that because, I certainly can understand the sort of blow to the ego that it becomes as you go, wait a second, I've got this pretty cool high power. I just cast Arrested Development, right? And then to throw yourself back into what is such a low status, vulnerable field as an actor.
Of actors. And I don't want this to sound conceited, but if you are meant to act, you will end up acting. And I feel like that is what I'm best at. And so I fed my acting Jones because I got to act all the time. I could, finally my boss about 5 years in knew that she had, a total workhorse in me, and said, if you want to audition for like a TV or thing, a day or two here or there, do. So, and then I started auditioning, literally for the guest star and whatever. And then I started working a little bit more, and it was kind of fabulous because I would work January, February, March, April each year, make a nice chunk of change for me, and then not ever have to take an acting job for the rest of the year because I knew that I had pilot season every year. Does that answer?
And were there times it does make sense. It's, I guess the idea of being what is a pretty high powered, let's say I'm working for NBC, I'm working for some, and then going in for guest stars, I guess, did you feel the difference of status? Like, did ever that make you want to feel like, ugh, I don't know if I want to be, someone says no to 3 lines after I had this other fabulous job?
The one thing that I learned early in casting, and it was both liberating and horrifying, is that 2 things. The best actor does not get the part, I would say 50% of the time. And the only thing we can do as actors is the best we can do. That's it. So in fact, while horrifying to realize, wait a second, the best actor didn't get that part. That was a bummer. But to recognize that, like, oh, I literally, if I go in and do what I wanted to do, that's as good as it's going to get unless you get the job. So it did help me in the sense that I just kind of realized that, like, all I can do is the best I can do. And although you can recognize that in your head, I think being involved in casting got me to recognize it in my gut.
So then it's not such a blow to the ego or such a blow to I suck. It's just, well, I didn't get the job. I know all the machinations of the sausage.
I mean, we are in an irrational business. So I always caution my students, do not try to apply rationality to this business. You are not in control. If you are a control freak, you might be in the wrong, seriously, because other business, I mean, even singers or whatever, you can sit or practice and sing. We don't sit on our beds and do monologues. We need an audience.
And there's more objective. I mean, when you talk about musical theater, there is more objective. I mean, Elizabeth is objectively the best singer in the history of the world. Objectively. That's not me being subjective.
And that's very true.
But also dancers and whatever, there's a level of objective measurement of a dancer.
I think
in a way
you're
that
right.
acting,
You're
it
right.
is taste, right?
I never thought of
I mean,
that.
there's nothing. There is something that would go, a bunch of acting teachers would get together and go, this one's better than this one, I think, if there's a big difference. But they would not all agree who is the best. They would not all agree on the number one.
There are certain technical things that you have to be able to do in order to be considered good. And I feel like with singing, it's the same thing. With acting, it's not.
Well, the way you talked about kitchen sink versus Shakespeare, I mean, it is a skill set to be amazing at Shakespeare. It's also a skill set to be amazing at kitchen sink.
And I
remember when people used to be like, Jennifer Aniston is not good as an actor because she can't do other things. I was like, she's great as an actor. She does that thing really well. That's hard to do.
We all have our bag of tricks, and don't let anyone tell you that that's not the case.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the 2 different hats that you were wearing in terms of, you sort of scoffed, and so maybe I'm wrong in Bride Wars that you didn't cast yourself. But were there ever times that the connections you knew from the world of being on the other side of the table then helped you actually get cast in roles?
A couple of things. I have been cast in 2 or 3 of the films I worked on. I never cast myself. I was reading with the actors, and every time the director said, I want you to play something, I'm horrified. I never take any credit. Literally, I don't have a screen credit. And if I did, I would want it to say, the director asked me. I did not. Well, like,
I promise I didn't do
because
this.
seriously, I do, I would have people go, oh, I saw you cast yourself. That's so, it's like, no, I did not cast myself. I just didn't.
Yep.
However, and this is getting so much better, but I would guess that I covered between my first pilot season, which was 94, and my last one, which was 2013. So 20 pilot seasons. I didn't do it for like 2 years in there. I would say I covered 250 to 300, at least 250 pilots. This is network television. There was not one part that someone that looked like me would get cast in. Not one. Now, were there parts I could have played? There are a fucking million parts I could have played. Right. But I, as I used to joke, I hit the uncastable trifecta. I was over 40, I was overweight, and I was ethnic, but not diverse. And so literally, I think it was easier for me to be a casting director than if like Elizabeth or someone, or you, a leading lady or a leading man.
Incredibly handsome man.
An incredibly handsome man with a mustache. You didn't have to say it.
It was obvious. They all know.
But I do think it would be harder, because it's like you would kind of be like, well, I can. But with me, it's like I was very aware of the looksism in the network, and so I did. There was one thing, I won't say who it was for, but I did. My agent said Marcia really wants to put herself on tape to play the wife of the lead, who is a character guy. And the producers were interested and showed it to the character guy, who said, she's too ugly for me. And that was the end of that. Now, let me just say this. There's no way in the world that if I had been walking down the street with that character guy, that anyone would have said, who's that handsome man with that dog? Right. But that, and so I think it was, like I said, I think it was easier for me because there was never, I was realistic. It's like, oh yeah, I would never get cast in this.
It does feel like it's one of the last bastions of, isms that are kind of allowed in this. As we go, ugly is not some, on TV, that's like the last thing that we don't want to show. We'll show any kind of racial minority, any kind of gender, but we don't really want to show ugly if we can avoid it.
And I'm of the mind.
And by the way, not that you're ugly, I would never say that, Marcia.
It's just sort of like, I look like a normal person, and I am of the mind that normal people actually would like to see themselves represented, just as diverse people would. And I keep waiting for the dime to drop. And it has to a certain degree, in the sense that there's oranges and, there's a ton, girls, all those, but the networks, it's still pretty, one of the frustrating things was I'm married to a Black actor. So I would always try as hard as I could to cast diverse actors. And finally they kind of was like, okay, we really have to make, this was my last pilot season, 2013. And then they just hired pretty shitty diverse actors instead of pretty shitty white ones. And I was just like, I can't do this. It was so.
This is not condemning of the show, but Elizabeth just did an episode of Gossip Girl. So we were watching the new Gossip Girl. Oh my God, the level of attractiveness of those people. It's disgusting. I'm like, nobody looks like that. Nobody.
And like I said, I'm not saying that the entire cast should look like regular people, because I get the aspirational, but I think they're so, they're dumb. They're missing out on seeing real people. And I try to just bother people. Whenever I work, I try to shake my fat just to freak out people. It's like, yes, I have arm fat, and so do most people. It drives me fucking mad.
It makes me wonder. I mean, so I've just recently, I never watched reality television until the pandemic. I just got into Survivor. My best friend really was into Survivor. And you get to see, I wonder how much of the appeal is you get to see real people on those shows.
I don't know. Let's look at reality TV, right?
I mean, right. Certainly there's some of the Jersey Shores and some of the aspirational still. Right. But some of those shows you do see some normal looking people.
But clearly people are fascinated by real people. So why not cast real people on television?
We're starting the movement right here, Marcia. We're starting it.
Exactly.
I did want to ask, as an actor, so you mentioned feeling more comfortable in the kitchen sink world than in the maybe, classical theater, that kind of stuff. But what about, you had a career that does film, TV, and theater. What have you learned between the different media in terms of what is helpful to you as an actor and how they compare and contrast?
What I have learned is that their honesty is honesty. Truthfulness is truthfulness. There is much less of a difference between theater acting and TV and film acting than a lot of people getting out of school think. And they get really tied up in thinking, oh, this is different. It is not different. Like I said, truthfulness is truthfulness. It's oftentimes, you know this, Charlie, a matter of volume. You know, you will either have a lav mic on when you shoot or a boom mic or both. So you never have to talk louder than this. And that's, you know, the biggest thing. I always say, nowadays we don't go into the room, but if you do happen to be auditioning on, on via Zoom, and there is a casting director or producer director, you're going to have to chat with them. You know, hello. If you can slip into the text of your audition without feeling the difference. So you're chatting, and then all of a sudden you're acting. Well, that's not right. But the great thing is we have our own barometer. You can tell that's not right. I try so hard to get kids to understand. Look, if you just got your MFA from Yale or Juilliard, I would say this: do not pronounce the H in what. No one says fucking what.
What are you talking about?
Exactly. You'll just sound affected. So those and TV and film is very mumble mouth. So it's about not being on your voice, not supporting yourself by your diaphragm. It's very sort of like dropping your G's, not pronouncing the H's. It's very mumbly. So I try really hard to make kids understand that, like, don't be daunted. Being real is being real. You know?
Yeah, I love that advice. That's something I often do with our students when we're helping them get into college. They have to do monologues, which is its own foreign thing. And just in the difference between the slate and the beginning, it's like, wait, well, what happened there?
Exactly.
Why did we all of a sudden we got real, and so that means we got breathy. And where did that go?
Can I say one thing about slates while I think of it?
Please. Of course.
Unless it says put it at the front, always put your slate at the end of your audition.
Ooh, I love it.
Because nobody feels comfortable standing there going, hi, I'm Marcia Debonis, I'm 5'4". So you don't want their first hit of you to be you standing awkwardly. So unless it says put the slate first, put it at the end. And another thing that I'm a big believer in, because we are now self-taping, and most of the time you don't have the advantage of even Zooming with producers and stuff. If you fuck up your slate, leave it. It'll be the only time they'll get to see you. So like one time I was like, hi, I'm Marcia Debonis. I'm 5'4", and I'm based, where am I? I'm based in New York. And I just left it because they got to see a little glimpse of me. I'm not saying you should do a slate and fuck up on purpose, but don't think that your slate is going to get you or lose you a job. It's not.
This is fantastic advice, and it's getting directly into the second half of the thing. So let's do it. Let's take our little break. And on the back end, we're going to talk a little bit about some casting tips with Marcia Debonis. All right, we are back with Marcia Debonis, and we're going to talk about some casting tips. And I really want to span a lot of territory. Some of the stuff you're doing with slates, I have those exact questions, so I can't wait for that. But especially maybe focusing on what's going to be relevant for young actors right out of school, who's a lot of our audience now. I'd love to start with, like, when you meet a young actor, maybe especially in a situation where you're not directly casting a role or a project.
Like on a general.
Right, on a general, or even maybe you're coming to school and doing a class with them, or you're seeing a showcase.
But I'm not actually auditioning now.
What are you looking for in that experience? What are you filing away? What information are you taking in about those actors when you meet a class of 20?
What I used to do every year was pilot season starts in January. So in December, I would reach out to all the agents that I knew I had the same sensibility. And that's one thing I think it's important for everybody to know. Just because one casting director doesn't like you doesn't mean that a million other will. And just because I'm saying one thing doesn't mean that's right. So just know that everybody has an opinion and no one is right. There's no hard and fast. Now, I would have generals, and I would call the agents that I liked and say, who have you signed since last pilot season? So it was usually kids out of MFA and undergrad that you feel are ready to carry a show, because I was casting the series regulars. So that's a very specific thing. And then I would have a general with them. And when you have a general, and I know this is easier said than done, but it's just about trying to be yourself. The reason I would have these is so that when pilot season was in full swing and cuckoo, like crazy busy, I would have a context. Because I wouldn't know them as actors, but I would know that they're with an agent who I respect. And oh, right, this girl reminded me of cross between Aubrey Plaza. That's what I would do a lot. I would literally just say, like, something either emotionally or physically, they remind me of something, so that when they're submitted, I'll go, oh, right, I loved her. She was, da 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 da.
And is that all in your brain, or do you have a system where they live, where there's an Aubrey Plaza button or something?
Well, I would write it into my little, I mean, now I'm sure everybody has it in a computer, but we would have a schedule sheet and I would just write in my little things. And I just found, for me, giving a physical comparison, like, oh, they remind me of a cross of this and that, was helpful. But I'm not looking for anything per se. And as hard as it is to just go in and try to be yourself, that truly is what
and then
you want.
What about, that's a wonderful situation if you're good at going in for a pilot season in general. I think you're feeling pretty good about yourself. But let's imagine a young actor who maybe is not at that point in their career, but they're meeting a casting director for a first time, being brought in for a role. I guess when you're meeting that young actor for the first time, because I felt like this was true for me right out of school, a lot of times they're like, I'll just bring him in for something. Right. Like, even often I wasn't necessarily right for it. Like, I'd be like, I'm 10 years too young for this part, I think. But they're just getting to know me, right? How much do you suggest that actor is like being themselves versus trying to do a great job with that role? Like, if they think they're brought in for something that's not quite right for them, and my sense of humor is a little different.
And I'm glad you said this, because there's one thing if you went in on something that you were right for, but you were 10 years too young, right?
Right.
Then I would say, go ahead, even though you look at it and are like, yeah, I'm too young for this. Go ahead, because theoretically you're right for the thing. What I advise against is getting, in whatever way, agent or some other way, getting an audition for something that you really are not right for, and you know it. Because what's going to happen is you're going to go in and the main remembrance is they weren't good. Because they're not right for it.
Bad for this, right? Yeah.
So I am not a big believer in just, I figure it's good for the casting directors to see me. It's like, no, it's not good for the casting director to see you do a reading for a role that you're not right for. Unless you're a fucking genius, and then fine. But, most of us aren't, so.
And is that something then, would you say to the agent, hey, maybe I don't want to, this is not the right one for me to go in?
Yeah. And I come from a very loving place. It's like, I don't want them to, can't think of a polite way to say blow their wad, but it's like, don't come in, don't send them in for something they're not right for. You're not doing them a service. You're doing them a disservice.
It's such that is a piece of advice I wish I'd gotten maybe 6 months earlier than I did, of like, everyone's going to want to meet you once, of just like, that first impression is valuable, and then they'll have seen you, and then it's harder to win over that first impression.
But the biggest piece, if I can, of advice I would give to kids just starting out, let your freak flag fly. Do not try to pretend you are something you're not. Who you are, there's a Margaret Mead quote that I always use. Always remember that you are absolutely unique, just like everyone else. So keep your unique, you know what I mean? It's like, don't try to will yourself down into something that you think that they're looking for. And don't try to hide your quirks and don't hide who you are, because guess what? That's denying, and then that's not real.
Yep. It's, how do you actualize that advice? Because I think that's the kind of thing, it's such good advice. They get it from the colleges too. They all say, be yourself, right? But especially now, when in a professional sense, when I'm being called in for Joe and Angels in America, it's like, how do I bring Charlie into that and as a freak flag?
So let's say this, because I think one of the things that young actors waste a lot of time on is trying to figure out what the casting director wants, right? So instead of just because television in general is playing yourself within the circumstances. It's not about transforming, which theater is and which film is. TV in general is playing yourself within the circumstances. So even if the prototype says, think, what would the kids know?
They all watch, what's the one about drugs? They all watch the
Yeah,
Euphoria.
it says
Euphoria. Thank you, Megan.
Zendaya,
Yeah,
however you
exactly.
pronounce
Yeah.
the thing. No one is going to out Zendaya.
Right. Mhm.
So don't use that maybe as a jumping off thing. But, like, well, the prototype said it's like Kramer from Seinfeld. Again, no one will out Kramer. So what I mean is, don't try to fit your choices into what you think they're looking for, because they do not know what they are looking for. And people spend a lot of time trying to go, well, I think, they said Kramer. So it's like, nope, don't do it.
It's such good advice. I feel like I often say that to Elizabeth when we're doing self-tapes together. I'm always like, if it's going to be that far away from you, they're going to cast someone else.
Right.
If you're doing that much acting, it's just not your part.
Especially on TV, because they don't want you to have to work that hard. You know what I mean? Right. They want you with 101 degree temperature to be able to do your thing.
Right. It's like, it feels against our instincts, especially as trained actors, though, because we want to go, but I can play anything. Here's what I would do with this role. I would transform myself. Look how much I can.
And I'm not saying that you can't transform on TV, because you can. But I am saying that trying to figure out what they're looking for and or trying to play a prototype is a waste of your time.
Okay, so let's imagine now I've let my freak flag fly. We've met wonderfully. I had a great audition. I didn't get a call back from you, and then crickets, right? So then I've not heard anything from you in a while. I have probably heard this advice from my school at some point that I should be keeping in touch with you. How do you like to? Do you want a thank you email? Do you want to know about the shows I'm doing?
I like feeling appreciated. So we used to joke in Lynn Kressel's office way back when I worked there, like, did we prefer flowers or food? Thank you. Right. I liked flowers. Everybody else, I think, wanted food. I think it's nice to, don't go on. But I think it's lovely to write either email if you can get it, or send an actual handwritten note just saying it was so nice to meet you, and I hope you'll keep me in mind if I'm ever right for something. One other thing that I want to talk about, this is my cheat sheet.
Marcia's got notes. See, this is what you should do, students. We want notes.
You trust that the CD likes what you're doing if they continue to call you in, even if you haven't booked anything. Yes. Because what Suzanne, again, I'll reference Suzanne Ryan, who cast Law and Order, The Mothership. And she said she could tell actors, because when she liked them, she'd just keep trying them. Trying different parts, And she said she could tell usually around the third or fourth time she could tell that they thought, well, I'm doing something wrong because I haven't booked. And they would change. And she always was like, no,
keep doing. You're getting the callbacks.
Right. Yep. So just don't go or try not to go to the, oh no, they don't like me. And another thing, a good audition will always pay off. Always. And truthfully, a good audition in this business is kind of the best you can hope for. Yep. So you're not going to get cast most of the time. It's just the reality.
But there's juice, there's value in that good audition for who you're seeing it for your own self.
Totally. And it's a weird thing because, you would like to think that, I remember everybody. But the reality is it is helpful to have an agent, because I might not have thought of you. And then someone says, well, what about Charlie? And I'm like, oh my God, of course.
Yep.
So,
all right. So then I don't send chocolates or flowers because whatever, I'm just out of school and I don't have any money, but I do send a note to you. And it was nice. A nice thank you note. Now it's been how long? 6 months, a year, 2 years. Do you want more correspondence? Do you think it's smart for them to
necessary?
Continue?
Although this is what I really don't think is necessary. And I don't even know if people do this anymore, but it used to be that we would get like postcards saying, I had a call back for a Tylenol commercial. No one cares. Right. I don't care. No one cares. So I'm not suggesting keeping in touch like with that kind of thing. But you could send Chris happy holidays, But the kind of like, I got this call back and I did this, you don't need to hear.
What about, do you like when people ask to be readers for you?
I never let anyone read for me because that's what I love to do. But
heck yeah.
So everybody's like, I'd love to be a reader. It's like, yeah, that's not.
You're like, that part is cast.
Exactly. I am cast in that role. However, I'm a huge believer in getting on the other side of the table. So I'm a huge believer in offering to be a reader. You will learn, have you ever you've been on the other side?
For sure. You better believe it.
You learn so much. Yep. So I'm a huge believer. Offer your services.
Well, and maybe let's speak to, so this is maybe some of our older listeners who've been out of school a little bit and have got maybe done some pilot seasons, gotten a bit of momentum. You mentioned that idea of, a good audition always will pay off. I guess I have had many students and have myself been somewhat in this position of going, you're in that place where you're getting lots of callbacks, you're getting lots of interest, but maybe you're not booking. And you're like, what do you do with that as an actor, especially? What do you do with that, feeling of like, there's juice, there's momentum.
Right.
I feel like I'm moving, but it's not manifesting.
Well,
it's not happening at all.
I think, and I know this is easier said than done, but I think you'd be really thrilled with the fact that you actually are getting auditions and getting callbacks, that you're on the right track. It takes time. And again, it's not that you didn't get it because you weren't the best. It's you didn't get it because you have brown hair and they decided they wanted a blonde. I mean, literally, sometimes it's as stupid as that. So I think what you try to do is appreciate that you're doing a lot more than most people. If you're getting callbacks, you're doing a lot more than most actors. Try to appreciate that and know that if that is happening, it means you are on the right track. And eventually you will not get callback, and not book something. That won't happen. You will book something. And it's about being patient. And if you don't, and some people, as I said, just don't have the stomach for this. And get out now.
It feels like it's hard from the outside world sometimes. Like I remember I was doing Shakespeare in the Park with Andre Holland, and this was before anything had happened in his career. I mean, he was playing a lead in Shakespeare in the Park, but he was trying to describe this thing to me of like, I have so much good stuff happening in my life. Like I'm so close to these projects that are so big, but that like maybe the outside world, when you talk to your parents, you talk to whatever, it's like, they don't understand any of that. It doesn't mean anything. It's not, you can't say I've got the 42 or I've got the thing that is like going to launch my career.
So I think
and
it's
just the frustration
about being patient and also recognizing if you have the stomach for it. I ultimately, after being here for a little over 10 years, was like, I didn't have the stomach to go get another restaurant job. So I, fell into casting. But this is a business we are not in control. So if you have an issue with being in control, you are so in the wrong business. Can I say two other things that I say that
please say two other things? Yes.
This is what's going to get me canceled, but I'm going to say,
okay, here we go. Yes.
If you want to feel safe, do not be an actor. Just don't do it. Safe acting is boring acting. I understand that we're living in a nightmare of a world. I understand it's terrifying what's happening. Being safe, if you want to feel safe, don't be an actor. If you have an issue with triggers, don't be an actor. We trigger ourselves for a living. That is what we do. So I have no patience, even though I would like to think I understand it, for this need for safety. It's like good art is not safe.
Not that dissimilar to you saying if you have a need for control. Right? To some extent, extreme safety is a need to completely control yourself.
So unless you get lucky and get cast right away, if you have a need for control, get out. Don't spend all the time doing it.
Before we leave that idea of momentum and callbacks or whatever, I'm always curious. Sometimes actors will describe, hey, I feel like that casting director felt like they owed me, and so they threw me this bone, and they found something for me because I did 10 great work, callbacks for them or whatever. Do you ever have that feeling? You're like, I owe that actor. That's been 7 great.
A little bit of an but I also think that a lot of time, I had my favorites, so I would. I'm a talent whore. So I just love people who are talented.
I'm going to get this person a job. I like them and I want to get them a job at this point. I think they're great.
Yeah. For example, this is one thing that I don't know that everybody knows, but if you are lucky enough to get an agent, and if for some chance it's 3 years on and you've had SAG insurance, and now all of a sudden, for whatever reason, you need. Now it's on the amount we make, right? Not on the weeks. I think it's on the amount. Yep. Let's say I need $5,000 in order to make my thing. You have your agent call casting directors and say, I have an actor who really needs to make their insurance. And people, that's what I mean, like for throwing them a bone. People will be happy to cast you as, the jury foreman. who says we find that, but you worked for a week and you got your $5,000.
And you get your SAG. Yep. Okay, you started doing it earlier, but I want to get into the self-tape since it is such a part of what we do now. I mean, you talk about theater, and there's some theater auditions that are coming back.
Have you had any in-person auditions?
Nothing in person.
Has Elizabeth?
Nothing. Everything has been self-tape. But that was true before the pandemic. I mean, she booked Jagged Little Pill.
Which was why I opened up the tape room, because it felt like it had this was in 2014, and it felt like
it is
everything.
It seems like it is much more an issue of convenience and cost than it is an issue of
everything in this business is cost. And don't think for a second that we wouldn't be back to in person if the producers hadn't recognized, we can have the casting directors work from home.
Yep.
We don't even have to, so I feel like
don't have to rent office space.
Yeah, exactly. And or we could just have to rent one little office. We don't need a tape room. Yep. Here's the main thing I would say about self-tapes: have your reader in the room with you if possible. Even if you have an appointment with it online or Zoom with a casting director, a producer, or director. If you have an agent, then you have your agent say, would you mind horribly if Charlie had his reader in the room? I have never known a casting director, except for me, to say no. I wouldn't say no, but you know what I mean?
And it's like what Aaron Sorkin reads with all those people.
Yeah,
too, right?
I mean, it's just sort of like most casting directors are thrilled to not have to deal with that aspect of it. Also, I would posit that Zoom is the death of spontaneity. I don't think you can be spontaneous on Zoom. You can't overlap. So if you can, just have a friend right there with you.
Yep. I love that. And that leads me, it's one of my questions I had written down was, how much do you like the reader to be, I'm going to say, like fully acting as opposed to kind of a polite distance? Like I'm going to say, especially in a scene where maybe it's very dramatic or it's where the reader has something really interesting to do. Do you want Charlie Murphy giving his incredible Carnegie Mellon performance behind the camera?
Well, yes, I would like Charlie Murphy to do that, but I don't want some shitty reader doing that.
But I'm saying, if I'm reading, I'm sorry, if I say I'm reading for Elizabeth, do you want my amazing crying performance?
It's sort of like in general, as when I'm auditioning, I'm just sort of like, unless you're really good and can keep up with me, which most casting directors can't because they're not actors like us. I'm fine with you just sort of like Suzanne Ryan, once again. She's not a great actress, but she gives you what she needs to give you.
She's just
So, I remember a couple of times way early on when I was doing pilot season, some actor was hell-bent on bringing their own reader. And I was like, you don't need to. Well, they really want to read with an actor. It's sort of like, I can act circles around you, dude, but fine. Well, they brought their own reader, and then the reader tried to take the scene from them.
Right.
So one of the things when you are a reader is you have to be aware that you are in support of the actor and not trying to, know.
It's finding that line sometimes of generosity of I'm generously giving the scene, but I'm not so sitting back that I'm not living truthfully with you.
And I'm a huge believer. And again, this is all different because we're not going in like we used to. And when we did go in, there was a reader, but I'm a huge believer in picturing what are you going to do if you have a bad reader? How are you going to handle it? And that goes for online too. And if you don't have the luxury of having your own reader in the room and you've gone it, what are you going to do if the reader is bad? Because what the tendency is, particularly with young actors, is you start the scene and you start third eyeing and going, oh my God, this reader is like the shittiest reader I've ever had. And then you're halfway through the scene.
Third eyeing, and you mean stepping out of the scene. So now
you're literally going, oh my God, I'm not in the scene because I'm so appalled by the bad acting, and yet I'm shooting myself in the foot. So I'm a big believer in really being clear. Like, I'm not going to let it throw me off if the reader is shitty.
Do you like a prop or a set piece, especially at home, when you could read at the kitchen table where the scene takes place at the kitchen table? Do you like that, or does that feel too kitschy to you?
I do, but I also I came up under Ellen Lewis, who is a very fabulous and fancy casting director. She does all of Martin Scorsese's movies. She hates props. And some of it, Charlie, and you know this, it's like, I mean, I've had fights with her. And in fact, I threw some Mike Nichols shit at her because she was like, I don't like activities. You're
talking about some shit that was Mike Nichols you threw at her? Or
I took Mike Nichols shit and I threw it at her. He was talking about when he did The Odd Couple, there's the card game, and how it's written so that everybody talks, at a certain time. And he just was like, no, we're playing a game every night. And they played the game every night, and the lines came out. And it's as an actor, I find an activity incredibly helpful. Here's the thing. A lot of people don't. Like I said, Ellen Lewis actively opposed to it. Keep whatever activity is below the framework. So it's helping you, right? But it's not too busy.
It's not distracting the scene. Yep. What about in terms of like costume? So, you know, this advice is now many years older from me leaving school, was like, hey, for TV and film, you're probably going to dress a little bit more in character than you would for a theater thing, right? A little bit of a suggestion.
Yeah, and I think that's true, but just a little. You know, you don't need to wear a white coat or a stethoscope. Right. But I always use this as an example. I cast the Julie Taymor movie Titus about Titus Andronicus. One girl came in for Lavinia, who's the pure as a driven snow ingenue, in like a mini skirt, and it was just sort of like that's just dumb. You know, but you don't. So if you're auditioning for a lawyer, then yes, you should, without putting on a suit, you should have a button-down shirt if you're a guy. You know what I mean? So I think a suggestion is helpful without going too far.
Does a self-tape change? I mean, does a self-tape give you a little more liberty to maybe throw on that suit jacket or throw on would you wear a little more on a self-tape?
Totally.
That was, I was impressed by how much Elizabeth would dress in character, and I would go, I never do that. I never wear that. Where she'll sometimes be like, you basically look like the character.
And also it helps you. It's not just helping them, it's helping you.
You do the full makeup, and while you're doing the makeup, you're also giving yourself some time to get in character. Okay, what about slates? You mentioned you like the slate at the end, which I love. Is this something, do you like when an actor sort of slates kind of in character? So
this is so funny because I did a little salon last night with a bunch of diverse actors, and I don't like it. But again, just because I don't doesn't mean that other people. What I think, particularly in this era of not being in the room, is the slate is the only time if you're good, you've already proven you can play the cop.
You've shown me the character.
You can play a cop. You don't need to slate as a cop. You need to slate as you, so they go, oh, wow, she's not at all like the cop she just read for. She's really good. And
you don't think that will pull them out and they go, oh, I guess that was fake. I guess that was acting before. If we see.
Not if it's at the end.
I think that end is a great suggestion. I think sometimes actors are worried about going, hi, I'm Charlie. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And then you're like, all of a sudden this serious thing. Not if it's at the end. But like I said, oftentimes I would say 30% of the time they will say, put your slate first.
It's at the beginning, How do you feel about lighting and sound and those other technical stuff? Do you have opinions?
I have talked to a lot of my casting director friends, and the thing that I feel very strongly is that we are worrying way too much. Not as an older person, I have recognized that they don't give a shit. Like I could tape it with this in the background.
I see plenty of actors do. They're just literally on the wall,
with
and that's it.
Younger kids, because they are more technically good. I think, buy a blue sheet that you can tack to the wall.
That you can never fold up into its whatever.
We got one of those things.
You can never get back into its circles.
We don't have room for this.
There's me just stepping on it a lot. There's a lot of stepping on it. Yeah.
So, you want the first hit that when they see you to not look like shit. But I think as good as self-taping is in the sense that we do have a little bit more control, I feel like actors take way too many takes. If you are prepared, you should probably not do more than 2 or 3 or 4 takes in casting. I usually found the last take was the best, but that doesn't, that doesn't necessarily mean that.
Anything I missed in terms of whether it's self-tape or just the casting world, of like any questions or big advice, anything else on that sheet that you want to give to some
if you do have the luxury of actually being in a Zoom with the director, producer, or even just the casting director, or actually in the room. Every audition I go in, after I say hello, I say, are there any traps to avoid or helpful hints? Because if the casting director is a good casting director, they have, like, whenever I would start a pilot, I would call LA to say, have you had sessions? And if so, are there any helpful hints or traps to avoid? Because a lot of times there are, and it's usually because the writing's not great. And so what you ask that and they'll go, you know what? There are actually. People are getting way too mad in that second scene. They don't want that. So I ask that every single audition I go to.
That is fantastic advice. I've never asked that.
Helpful hints or traps.
And I've often wondered if I've stepped into that trap.
Yeah, and you know what? 9 times out of 10, they'll look at you and go like, what? But the 10th time someone will go, yeah, don't fall into the anger trap. I had
Yep. This is not meant to be so emotional here. It seems like you might want to go there, but it's actually not that.
Doing this. And again, usually it's because of the writing hips them that way.
That's great. And I think that's something we remember from first graduating of like, always ask a question, or some people said, don't ask too many questions, but it was always, there's always that nervousness of going, how much should I talk before the thing? I don't want to sink my audition before I do it.
I think start to feel, because I have watched people flap their jaw to the degree beforehand.
Let's get on to the audition.
It's like, you're not going to get cast simply because it's like, oh my God, I don't want to deal with this person on set.
Yeah.
So, you want to chat and whatever, but you don't want to do it for so long that it's like, okay, start, please.
All right, we're going to get to our game, and we're going to test that encyclopedic knowledge you've mentioned. This game is called Casting a Wide Net. I'm going to throw out a few remakes, potentially, of some classic movies and TV shows, and let you try to recast these as best as possible. We'll see what you can do.
Now, remember, I haven't done any casting in 10 years.
It can be outdated. No one's going to know. And you can also make up names, because you could be like, they're a hot young actor, and no one's going to know until you're fine with that. Are you ready to play Casting a Wide Net?
I am ready to play.
They're doing a remake of Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump is coming back in 2022. Who is our new Forrest? Who are we bringing into the room?
There's a kid, and I'm spacing on his name, but he is the lead in The Bear.
Yes.
You know who I mean?
Yes, from the one with William H. Macy. It'd be really interesting to have us try to think
is he? It's the one about the restaurant, right?
Yes. No, I'm saying he's from he was from Shameless.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Beforehand,
and I never watched Shameless.
Yes.
Jeremy Allen White.
There's Meghan.
There you have it.
Jeremy Allen White. That's our new Forrest Gump, huh?
I also think someone like Paul Dano, who has a sort of interiorness to him, would be interesting.
Would we not think that we might need a neurodiverse actor to play?
Oh, yeah.
Forrest
well,
Gump,
that's a whole another thing. And such an interesting thing this year, are now only allowed to play what you are.
I'm trying very hard to get you canceled. You promised you'd get canceled. You said nothing offensive so far.
No,
Marcia.
but I mean, I feel like you would.
Three-quarters
but
of the
thing
episode.
That's interesting is that, yes, you would like to, but by virtue of the fact that neurodivergent people have had that held against them, the pool is so much smaller.
And that is something we'll talk about maybe at the end, what is changing. That is something we've had now so many neurodiverse students who are now entering school. So it's more 2021, more than.
Good. Now, neurodiversity is in general Asperger's or on the spectrum. Right. Is that good? And good.
More and more, but certainly of adult actors, there's way fewer than there.
Right.
Right. Hopefully they're going to be.
And that's very true. You're right.
Marvel just can't get enough and wants to do a new Iron Man. This probably is actually happening. I don't know. But who's going to replace the great Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man?
Let's talk about Andre Holland.
Why not?
Andre Holland,
get in here.
Who I saw, when he graduated from NYU. I flipped my lid for him and I just tried and tried. And this is what it was like when he came out. When did he come out? About when you did?
Probably earlier? A little bit, I think a little after me. He's because grad school, I was undergrad. So he was a little older than me. But I think maybe a year or two. He was right out of school basically when we were together.
Anyway, I just tried him for, like we were doing, because nobody has an original idea, a remake of the Rockford Files, which is an old thing. And I tried him for Rockford. And guess what their reaction was? He's so good. Could you try him for the sidekick? And I did, and he booked it.
Yep.
But Andre Holland, for my money, is a genius. He's got everything. He's got humor. He's sexy. He's just a fucking amazing actor.
Yep. Totally. I can see him in the suit trying to be, show a little bit of wealth. I got these big towers or whatever. All right. What about they're making a new Kramer versus Kramer, one of my favorite movies. New Kramer versus Kramer, two amazing actors. They need two actors who are going to be able to hold up to Meryl Streep.
Let's think about, that would to me be kind of fun to think about. Should we try to cast a real life couple?
Oh.
You know what I mean? So I hate to go back to Paul Dano, but he and Zoe Kazan.
Yep.
Alessandra Nivola and that lady who's married to him. That British, you know who I mean.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah.
Kind of fun.
Oh yeah, make it half reality TV, half
Right.
a movie. Yeah, I like it.
And there are you and Elizabeth can do it. There are
Yeah,
several.
thank you.
Ray and I will do it.
I just wanted to say this game was going to go on until you cast me in something. I'm just going to say now you've won the game. You've won. It's fantastic. What about they're making a new Twitter biopic, and we need an Elon Musk. Who is going to be the wonderful Elon Musk portrayer? Who's the downfall of Twitter?
Well, he's too old. I was going to say Rylance.
Mark Rylance. Oh, yeah, a little age makeup on him.
Yeah. Well, now they can CGI everything.
CGI that.
So just
sure.
CGI the whole thing.
Uh-huh.
I feel like that would be a part that I literally would check out South African actors. He's South African. I mean, he grew up there. And I have a feeling, and trust me when I say I hate that Brits and Aussies and all the other people are cast instead of Americans. Yeah. It's so frustrating to me, but Elon Musk somehow feels like it would not be an American.
It would not be an American. I think that's probably true.
What's his name? The guy from again, he's probably too old, but he was in Schindler, not Ray Fiennes. Oh God, who am I thinking of? He was in, I'll think of it and tell you, and you can put it in.
Perfect.
But I think he's German.
Some ADR here for the...
Yeah, exactly. Well, ADR.
All right, what about they're making a movie all about COVID-19, which I don't know why they're doing this, but we need an Anthony Fauci. Who's an Anthony Fauci character?
If anyone lives in New York,
you
will probably have seen a local commercial of a guy who has a paving thing around pools. It looks exactly like it.
We got to find the guy who does paving things about pools.
Oh, wow. Fauci. I mean, I feel like Dustin Hoffman could do it. A lot of it would sort of be like right age but I also feel like with all the makeup, like people can kind of pass for anyone.
You can look like anyone. Yeah.
Right.
The magic of that.
I mean, Gary Oldman didn't he play Churchill? You know what I mean? So.
Yep. Took it on the challenge. All right, what about, let's go to television, because you mentioned a remake of Seinfeld, and we got to know, who is going to out Kramer? Who's our Jerry?
Oh, well, our Jerry is we're fantasy casting.
Oh, for sure.
So our Jerry is maybe Chris Rock.
Oh.
And we would be a diverse cast.
Oh, Chris Rock as Jerry Seinfeld. I could see that. Okay. Still a comedian.
Yes. Kramer, I'm not sure.
Kramer?
But someone, who's an antic, Martin Lawrence.
An antic, physical kind of comedian.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right, what about I Love Lucy? We're making a remake of I Love Lucy. Who could be a Lucille Ball?
Well, I know Deborah Messing has always wanted to play her. Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
And was bitter as a pill that
Wait, was Nicole Kidman got to do it?
I didn't see it. That didn't feel right to me. Who is, I feel like there is somebody that I was like, she's so sort of I Love Lucy-ish.
I didn't also give you the warning to bring your Rolodex where you could have really done something.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, my last question is a little bit easier. It's just of all the projects you've done, and again, we said you've never cast yourself in something, you've only done it when you've been forced to. What is one where you wish you could have dove into? Or what's a project that you go, God, I would have been so good in this if only I could have been cast?
That I worked on?
Yeah, it could also be just something from the world that you go, oh, I always want to play this part, your own Lucille Ball. But if there was one that you go, oh, I just missed this one, and I think I would have been so good in this character.
I can't think of any. I do feel like I should just follow Jane Howdyshell around and just pick whatever job she rejects.
She says no to. Yeah.
And one quick thing, I find it helpful to casting directors and agents if you can kind of for your own self, try to figure out like who would you follow around and take the parts.
I would take Chris Pratt before all the parts that he didn't
that's
lose weight
exactly
for.
right.
You know what I mean? Like when he got an amazing shape, and I'm like, but I didn't, so I can take the parts.
So I can take the parts that he's no longer right for.
Yeah.
But try to be realistic. Sometimes I'll say that, and then some like character guy will like Ben Affleck, and it's like, dude, like, you are not like Ben Affleck.
Give me the Batman suit. I'll be fine. I can put the suit on. That's no problem at all. All right, our last chance to cancel you, Marcia, before we let you go, is just, I want to talk a little bit about how do you feel this industry changing in 2022? So I know you got out of 2013 casting, but let's talk about how things have shifted.
I think things have shifted so much, but not enough. As I said, I'm married to a Black actor. Theater. I refuse to just try diverse actors for the supporting roles. And I think LA actually, without saying it, liked that they had one person who wasn't about the pretty and the whatever. So, for example, the place that I worked talked a big thing about diversity. Talk. They did nothing about it. They did not hire diverse writers. They did not hire diverse directors. They did not hire diverse casting directors. So what would happen each year is they would make a big thing, and then we would cast it, and there would come a point where it would be like, oh no, we had 6 parts to cast. We cast 5 of them with white people, and then they would try to shove a diverse actor into the part, whether it supported it or not. And this happened quite a bit. And what would inevitably happen is they would cast some pretty diverse actor who couldn't act. They would do the table read and they would be fired. And then the place that I worked would claim that they couldn't find
did their best.
any diverse actors. And it drove me mad. So I feel like now they're not just talking, they're actually casting diverse actors. And so now it's still not enough, in my opinion. I also, 10 years ago when I taught at Juilliard, I would have to have a conversation with the diverse actors. And the conversation was, you're going to have to be patient and don't take it personally if your white classmates get agents from the showcase and you don't. That means nothing other than we are in a racist industry. And now I have the exact same conversation with the white actors. Because in typical fashion, our business has overcorrected to the point of ridiculousness. But I just, patient. Yeah. So now I do feel like, and so all of a sudden people are given an opportunity, and good for them. I am fundamentally against that you're only allowed to play the people that the person you are. I am Italian, and I would never go in for a Orthodox Jew or a Hasidic Jew or anything like that. But someone with the last name Cohn, I'll go in for all the time. And I'm waiting for the time where I'm going to be told that I can't do that. My husband and I want to do Driving Miss Daisy, and I guarantee you, someone will be like, "He's not Jewish." So I'm sick of all of this bullshit.
I mean, I am Jewish, and you would never know it looking at me. So
no,
I can never play that part. I can never play sort of stereotypical Jewish part because I don't look at it. It's really interesting. Murphy? Well, the Irish part is
Murphy seems so Irish.
I'm half Irish, half Jewish.
Mama's Jewish.
Yeah, which
so
like
you are Jewish.
Exactly. But no, it's so interesting, and the way we're talking about this is going to get a little esoteric financial point, but the way that like we raised interest rates, which to try to combat inflation, there's that like delayed effect that happens, which I think a lot of actors are now feeling in stuff like agents. Hey, agents are really looking for diverse.
I can't get a white actor and an agent.
But that's because the agent stables were so. Didn't have enough, and now people are asking for them, right? So it's like it's the weird, slow, delayed effect of going. We're trying to fix this thing, but it's not actually meaning that there are no parts for white actors. Clearly, there are, but you feel like in weird segments of the economy, feel the interest rate goes up, and hopefully it trickles down, and it can be.
That's exactly right. But we are experiencing, as white actors, what diverse actors have experienced for 100 years since the business started. So, I get that people are frustrated, but it's just like, suck it up, kids, because we're just having to go through and it was wrong when it was done to Black actors, and it's wrong when when it's done to white actors. My friend, and I won't say her name, but she cast something in a TV series, and she was told, unless it's a plot point, do not cast anyone white or over 30.
Oh, not over 30. How dare I'm young. Yep. We're so young still.
Yep. Yeah. Nope.
Yep.
So that's, the ridiculousness that happens in this.
I don't think anyone's going to cancel you over that. Those are some very reasonable thoughts. We failed.
Okay, good. I don't really care. I mean, as long as they don't cancel and I can still work in theater, I could give a shit if I never do any TV film.
What about, my last question is to throw out to a young actor, maybe especially who wants to have your career, who wants to have, whether it's specifically casting and acting, but wants to have this multi-hyphenate dual career. What advice would you give to that young person of like how they can have a Marcia Debonis career?
It's an interesting thing because I don't know whether casting director, I think it depends, but I'm not sure that saying I'm an actor is I want to continue acting and also cast, I'm not sure you would get the job. I just got kind of lucky. But so I don't feel like, I know some of my friends were like, oh, Marcia kind of got, like, I ended up getting a better agent from my contacts with casting, and they tried to do it, but it's sort of like, well, A, you have to be talented, and B, it may or may not happen that way. But I do know when I have tried to get actor friends gigs with casting director friends, they don't want them to, because they don't want to have to worry that they're going to leave for an audition and da 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 da. But writing and directing is that's what a lot of my friends do. Hyphen it was,
because they're
also
direct their own
writers
projects.
and
Well, and you started a theater company too. Where that's another way to go. I'm going to give myself.
And I started I did the tape room, and which is now it's just online. But
all right, is there anything else you need to plug in terms of where people could be following you?
I'm trying to think if there was anything here that any words of wisdom.
We'll certainly put the links to the tape room there. Do you have a social media where people could be following you if they were to?
Oh, I think I don't. I do know.
Fantastic. We love it. You can send a postcard to Marcia if you want to say you enjoyed the episode.
Okay, one really quick little thing. Don't be afraid to bring humor to comedy, humor to drama, and drama to comedy.
Think about it.
It lifts it. It lifts it. Like, you're watching Law and Order, and it's serious, and then someone laughs, and it's like, oh, that's real. So my last
that's such good advice. I feel like that is every monologue I work on, I'm always like, where's the opposite of this thing? Where is the thing? That's
another thing. I'm a huge believer. Play the opposite, particularly if the writing is sappy. Yep. Do not play into that. You play against that. If the writing is angry, do not play into that. You play
top
against
of your intelligence, right? I would never want to sound sappy. If it sounds like it's that, I almost have to try not to.
Right, but you see people fall into that. That's true. And don't fake tears.
But if I'm really good at it.
That's exactly. And it's like, my big thing on that is, if you feel yourself getting up here, you're faking it. And just go into a lower register. Or, once again, Suzanne Ryan, who had to cast people for Law and Order, who just, their kid had just died. She would, as she was walking them into the room, she would always say, if you're not full emotionally, play shock. And guess what? Shock and stillness
on TV for sure. Or of course you could have a kid, right? If you have a kid, you'll just cry at the drop of a hat anyway. I'm telling you, it's easy.
Or you have a child, and then your acting gets better.
Marcia, this was such a pleasure. Thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you.
Happy Hanukkah. It's night 3 as I record this, and I really hope you enjoyed that conversation with Marcia. She is just so whip smart and funny, and I just love the way she came in with a sheet full of advice, especially so much advice that is like good and specific to casting today. That was so cool. And she was so smart to say, in my opinion, with so much of the stuff that is different from casting director to casting director, that was definitely a lesson for me early in my career, as you kind of try to adjust to like what is different in terms of the advice you'll get in school versus in the professional world, and recognizing how different those two things can be from each other, as well as the delivery method of those different sources. Someone who's a teacher is so much more likely to be reasoned in the way they talk about this, whereas some of the kind of industry business people can be much quicker and more cavalier with things and maybe more abrupt in their delivery. Like, it is this. It can be really jarring coming out of an educational institution, which is normally full of very heart-centered people who aren't leading with the dollar sign. And this is where Marcia, like Jeff before her, are potentially deceptive examples, and that they both do tend to lead from the heart and are more educator-centered than the average industry person, which maybe helps them serve as a bit of a bridge to some of the folks you'll meet. Which, of course, is not to say that, like, most human beings behind the table are like monsters. Of course not. Most people in the industry are very kind human beings. I just remember being jarred by how quick and crass some people in the kind of real world could be coming out of school, and the way they would talk about things would just be like, oh God, that's not the complicated discussion that we'd have in school. It's like, this is this. And even here in this discussion, where I think we rarely ventured into something crass, there's an ease that creeps into a familiar conversation between actors where it's easy to land on quote unquote answers that really aren't capital T true. Like we talked about TV only being pretty people, or only people with an Instagram following can book TV, right? And of course, there are great counterexamples, right? That is hyperbolic to say it like that. And when we discuss delicate topics like diversity in the industry, I mean, it has to be acknowledged that things are never as, pardon my pun here, never as black and white as it can sound from listening to a short conversation, right? There is no such place as the industry out there. There are only thousands of people and companies with different motivations and different perspectives who kind of coalesce to make up the economy of Broadway TV and film. So people will say the industry is X, but there is no industry there to be X as one monolith, right? It is impossible to accurately describe the movements of all the parts in a shifting landscape, just like it's impossible to locate a particular electron in an atom. I'm not sure if that's the right metaphor. I haven't taken a science class in 2 decades, but that idea of like, it's somewhere in there. And if you can kind of describe all of the general idea of it, but you can't describe an exact place. I'm going to stop with this metaphor because I think it's reached its place of usefulness, as we say. But just to say that, like, a word of caution to anyone who's hearing things that we are said kind of cavalierly between two actors, as if that is, capital T true, because of course it's not. One thing I do want to highlight is just some of the great acting advice Marcia gave here. This is where I think she is really different than a lot of casting directors in her ability to give some of these high-level acting tips. Not to say that there aren't other casting directors who came from the acting world and who are great actors, but I think Marcia is particularly well-resourced in that vein. She's giving these tips and tricks that really come from an acting perspective and aren't just tricks. Even though she used that word tricks, you can tell like they're based in something that is acting. And again, when we talk about that bridge from school to life, which many of you, if you're in school now or right out of school, are going to be navigating, this is a case where how do you add some of the tips and tricks from, people who know on-camera work, who know self-tapes, who know the industry, but not actually throw away all of that great acting training that you spent 4 years getting? It is easy to hear some of the industry advice you're often going to get from an agent, manager, casting director, those kind of people, and think, oh, that's the only thing. What they mean is this, which then can lead to a really hollow performance, just as you would often do with the director, who might give you a kind of result-oriented note. Your job is to synthesize and integrate that through the lens of the other great work that you're doing. So if someone tells you to be mumbly, like Marcia did here, right? So TV's kind of mumbly, so it's exactly like this, right? That doesn't mean only do that, right? You still have to act and do all that stuff you were doing before. You're just making a kind of dialect style change, right? You're adding in the dialect of mumble, but you're still playing the same objective and fighting for the same truth and stuff that you were doing before, right? And the same could be true for something like a tone note. Sometimes a director, a casting director will give you a note about tone, and we know as actors we're not supposed to play tone. An emotional quality, we know we're not supposed to play our emotions, right? These are the kind of things that as trained actors, we know that we are not supposed to play into those, but we still have to take the note and achieve the result that the director or the casting director wants. So often you're kind of taking that adjustment and translating it into a bit of something that will still allow you to play actively while making sure you achieve the result that's looked for. Too often what young actors do, and I see this mistake a lot, is they jump right to that step and try to give the result. Like, oh, I got it. I can give you what I think you're looking for, what I think you want it to sound like, which will give you the pat on the head of, oh, they took the note, which is good. But it often leads to not very interesting work, right? Because imagining many people are getting this note that they're giving. It's like, oh, I think she needs to be X, right? And as she says, she needs to be X. You can't just give them what you think Marcia's idea of X is. You have to give Charlie's fully fleshed out performance integrating the idea of X that Marcia's throwing at you. Okay, that's it. We achieved a holiday. Next week, we have our pre-recorded mailbag show, which I think was fun and actually had some pretty good info from some of your great questions. We got so many great questions, mostly via email, though we got a bunch from Instagram too. And so it was so fun to get to do that. And, Meghan and I got a little fun and spicy with it. We thought about having a drink before we did it. We didn't, but we still brought a little bit of that holiday cheer as if, they were sipping eggnog. And we played some games. Meghan attempted a password-style game for me, and I came back at her with a nice trivia-based game. You all will be able to play along as listeners of the pod because they're all based on previous episodes of the podcast, especially this year, though some going back into last year for sure. Most of all, a huge and happy holidays to you all. I'm going to end on this note. I can't believe we're in the outro and I'm still talking. I have more to say. We're already at over 90 minutes. It's fine. Which is just some big love to the artists in your life. we often talk about the difficulty of the industry, and sometimes people criticize the career choice to be an actor. You hear that a lot. But can we also just give some love to the incredible bravery it takes to decide to be an actor, to be an artist really of any kind? Elizabeth and I went to a holiday party last night full of a lot of actors and artists. And I just walked out of there saying, I love this community so much. At first it was just nice to, be social, which is something we haven't done for as much, during the pandemic and all that. But I feel like actors sometimes, we just hear about the negatives in terms of the stereotype or the image of an actor. And, there is just something truly special about the kind of people who choose to become actors in general, right? Often we're sort of compared to, muggles versus artists. You sometimes hear that from the schools. They'll say like, oh yeah, as opposed to the muggles, we're in this thing. And I really do feel like there's a special magic, in what it is to be in a room full of like charming and deeply engaging people. I think artists, and especially actors, we tend to be empaths and sensitive and just generally very smart, and we tend to be all around great people. So not to go on a long rant about how amazing actors are, but I just was feeling that, and I'm going to say that into the universe because I think it's really true. So if you're ever out there and someone's going, oh, you decided to be an actor, eye roll, you're like, that's actually pretty amazing and good for that person. And I think it's just, maybe I'm specifically countering the whatever that eye roll is inducing of sort of the vainglorious image of an actor. Let's counter it with the people I met at that party who were just sensitive and wonderful and charming and fun and all the things that I think we know most actors to be. It's a really special community. All right, now go rate us, review us, tell us why you love being an artist, or tell us why you love the artist in your life if you're a follower of one. You also can follow us at Mapping the College Audition, which is our own special feed of all pod all the time. And check us out at mtca.nyc for help with your individual prep for your college audition process. To my young artists out there mapping their journeys, have a wonderful holiday. We'll see you next week for our mailbag.